Hello, and welcome back to the Pave the Way podcast, a joint initiative with Ragiri Foundation and the National Institute of Urban Affairs, where I, your host, Akash Basu, speak with mobility experts and people with interesting ideas around the globe on all kinds of issues and ideas surrounding sustainable mobility and transport planning. On the podcast today, we have American political cartoonist from St. Paul, Minnesota, Andy Singer. He is a man who can truly tell a story through one picture. He has many cartoons and caricatures highlighting the failure of our transport systems in addressing the real problems. Today, I have the honor of getting his thoughts and picking his brain on topics relating to sustainable mobility, the role of the bureaucracy in the issue, both in India and the USA, and much more. How are you, Andy?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on your podcast.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure. Let's just get started. So,
Sure.
what is your perception on the current global problem with mobility, or rather, lack of attention or resources dedicated to sustainable mobility options?
Um, I think as I said to you before, I think we're burning too many fossil fuels and we're expending too much energy and expending too many resources and devoting too much of our space and time to moving people and goods. And the reason for this is that we're addicted to sort of automobile and highway-based, highly mechanized and technology-intensive transportation systems. And also we're addicted to city and urban planning that's based around those ideas of mobility. And the system and the industries and government agencies that sort of support this system tend to monopolize transportation dollars and resources and leave very little money left over for sustainable mobility options like bicycling and walking and public transit, and leave very little money left over for progressive changes in land use and urban and regional planning.
It just sometimes seems silly, doesn't it? The fact that we have this major global issue, one that is clear as day, one that is clearly adding to the global warming crisis, and yet the higher ups, our bureaucracy, are often constantly implementing systems and policies that feed into it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's not, we've been aware of the problem since I was in college. Since before I was in college, we've been aware of the problem for like since the 1950s. And people have been writing about it and making cartoons about it and, bringing attention to it, and nothing changes, or very little changes. And I think the reason for that, I mean, one of my major issues is funding structures. We've set up these funding structures, at least in the United States. I don't know what the situation is in India, but in the US, we financed all of our highway building with gas taxes. We created fuel taxes. And in Europe, people pay a lot more than the United States in fuel taxes. I mean, fuel there, I don't know what it is now, but I would guess that it's at least the equivalent of $8 a gallon. I don't know what that is in liters. But in the United States, it's maybe only $4 a gallon, $3 or $4 a gallon. And so Europe has much higher fuel taxes. And in addition to having higher fuel taxes, they have laws in place that allow that the revenue that is generated by that to be spent on public transport, or to be spent on bicycling and walking projects, or to be spent on anything that might improve a transportation situation. And in the United States, the automobile companies lobbied back in the 1930s and 40s, when these laws were put in place, to prevent that money from being spent on anything but highways. And so in almost every state constitution, each state in the United States has its own constitution. There's a constitution for the entire country, but then each state has its own sort of founding document or constitution. And in most states, there are amendments to those constitutions that were put in between the 1930 and 1950 that mandate that fuel taxes and toll revenues have to go to highways. And the most extreme example was, I'm not sure if this has been amended recently, but until recently, the state of Alabama, for example, actually had an amendment that forbid the state from spending any money on public transport.
My God.
So I don't know if you've ever heard of in the United States, a very sort of watershed moment in the civil rights struggle was the Montgomery bus boycott, which Martin Luther King Jr. helped to bring about. This was in the 1960s. And the city of Montgomery, because of this, is in Alabama. And because of this amendment or this law, they're down to like 8, or we're down to like 8 bus lines in the whole city. And they only operated like Monday through Friday and part of Saturday. And, it was ridiculous because the state couldn't subsidize them at all or spend any money on them at all. And so the legacy of those laws is one of the reasons I think that the United States keeps building highways and doesn't spend more money and attention and resources on public transit and on better urban planning and on bike and pedestrian issues. And so that's discovering, I don't know what the situation is in India, but I'm going to guess that in the bureaucracy, that the devil is often in the details. You will find that there are certain laws or things in place that are often put there by the automobile industry, which is tremendously powerful. India, like Tata Motors, I don't know, but they've been around for a long time. And in the US, it's like General Motors was the evil boogeyman for a long time. There was a guy who used to be the head of it named Alfred Sloan, who he was a fascist. He did a lot of things to destroy public transit in the United States. So,
yeah, in India, our road systems and transport systems are built around getting from point A to point B as fast as possible. And
right.
Generally, you'll see that people are happy. And, I started working on these issues not that long ago. I started working where I am now not that long ago. And initially, yeah, I saw all the roads widening and the footpaths getting smaller and less space and nothing being made for cyclists. And I didn't take into consideration that, this is really bad and this can be really negative for people, for any option, for any sort of sustainable mobility options. Now that I'm working on these issues, it's awful, right? And it continues to happen. We will continue to put our resources into making point A to point B transport as easy as possible. We'll widen the roads, we'll make more underpasses, our systems will always gear towards these policies. And the problem is that people are happy. The problem is
they're happy, but they're not happy. If you poll most people, they are tired of traffic congestion. And my guess is I've been to Mumbai, and in New York City, for example, if for a while the average vehicle speed in Midtown Manhattan in New York City was 5 miles an hour, and you can ride a bike faster than that. And that's because automobile traffic congestion was so bad. They finally had a mayor, Michael Bloomberg, who appointed a woman, Jeanette City-Khan, as transportation commissioner. And they stopped designing the city around what they call LOS, or level of service for cars. So the sort of metric by which we've been designing cities, and I'm guessing this is true in India as well, is LOS, level of service. And that means how fast a car can get from point A to point B, or how fast a car can get through an intersection or something like that. And I think planners and people started to realize that this is an absolutely insane way to design cities, because first of all, you don't even achieve your goal, which is to, the more you widen roads, the more people drive in and the worse traffic congestion gets. And there's what planners call induced demand, where the more roads you create, the more people move further out from the city and start driving. And then pretty soon traffic congestion is as bad as when you started. And so, it's completely insane. I don't think people are even happy about it. And that's the thing, is like, we're sort of destroying the planet with hypermobility, and people aren't even happy. They're not even enjoying themselves while they do it. It's like they're bitching about the traffic, and they're not even having a good time. I mean, I've been on train, even the public transport, in both cars. Well, one time in Mumbai, I was there for a car-free day event that a guy named Kalpesh Parekh, he organized in 2011, and he was just a guy. He worked. I believe he was like a marketing manager for a beverage company, but he rode a bicycle and saw how ridiculous the situation was in Mumbai, and he knew other people in the alternative mobility community, other cyclists and people, and so they put together this event, and in many cities in the West, in the United States, but also in Europe, and I think also in other parts of India, they have like marathon days, or they have city bicycle tours. So like in Montreal, in Canada, they have the Tour de l'Île, which is this like a big city bike tour. Or in New York City, they have the Century Ride once a year, and they close off all these roads, and people can ride through all 5 boroughs of New York City. And so he was trying to do the same thing in Mumbai, and he created this route and a map. And I think he got like several thousand people for the first one, like 4,000 or 5,000 people, but he wasn't able to sustain it. It only went 1 year. And he couldn't get enough more funders or people to renew it for another year. But when I was there, I mean, the traffic was insane. We went to various places, and it was like at one point we were just sitting there not moving at all, for like 20 minutes. It was like we could have walked to where we were going faster than we could have driven, except that there was no way to walk, because as you said, like the sidewalks, or they don't even have sidewalks. It's just like a white line that demarcates where you can walk, and it's like getting smaller and smaller and smaller, to the point where over this one bridge there was no pedestrian walkway at all. And so we had to get over this bridge, we had to wait in traffic forever. Anyway.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's certainly true that most parts of India still have major congestion, and nobody's really happy with that. But I think, so where I stay, Gurugram, we've actually improved our roads to the point of, sorry, I thought your camera had stopped. We've improved our roads to the point where congestion levels are much lower. We've just created all these systems by widening roads, by forming these places where underpasses with no speed breakers, no crossings. People can move much faster and all that. But what has happened is now there is basically no infrastructure for any people on these roads. Forget bike lanes. It's that, one of the most popular roads in all of Gurgaon is something called Golf Course Road. And it was more recently converted into two 6-lane highways on either side of the road. And there are like families with their children, people from the lower socioeconomic class have to cross these roads every day. And you see these cars going at like 100 kilometers an hour, at least sometimes.
Yeah, it's the same thing in the United States. I mean, we have all these huge boulevards. People here call them stroads, because they're not really a street and they're not really a road, they're a strode. And there'll be 4 lanes, 5, and this is in an urban area, 4 to 6 lanes. And if there's a bus stop or a school or something on the other side of them that people want to get to, they get killed. And there's every year here, and just in my city, which is a very small city, we have dozens of people who are killed by cars. Sometimes little kids, who are just trying to go to school, and drivers don't stop, and they don't signalize every intersection on these things. Sometimes you have to go a mile between traffic signals to get across one of these roads, or they don't have signals at all. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's really awful. And I mean, obviously you must know, like where I am, Gurugram is the most polluted city in the world. And also India is obviously the home to the most deaths worldwide every single year. I think between 2010 and 2020, over 1 million lives were lost on our roads, over 5 million injured. So just completely crazy. Just a note on that, on the car free day. So at Ragiri Foundation, actually, just late last year, we completed 8 years of Ragiri Day. And Ragiri Day is our car free initiative where on Sunday mornings, we open the roads for about 3 to 5 hours, anywhere in that range. And we just let people come and do whatever they want, right? Walk,
That's
cycle,
great.
people will host activities like yoga and Zumba and stuff like that. And we had really good footfall numbers. Obviously, with COVID coming around, that the conversation died out a little bit. And we restarted after, and it's been great. We've again got our numbers up. And I think this idea of allowing people to reimagine their streets as being something else, I think it's
Yeah, I
fun.
think that's really important. I think that whenever you do these kind of events where people are out and get to walk down a street that they don't usually get to walk on, or bike on a street that they don't usually get to bike on, they see how it could be. And I think, you know, getting people to envision how things could be is half the
Exactly.
battle.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, I think these events are really important in terms of making broader political progress on getting things done. And I think also whenever you can get legislators or people in government to come ride with you on some horrible street just to see what it's like, again, I think it's really eye-opening for them to see, how things are.
Hmm.
And yes, what you're saying about like in the United States, I forget what it is, we're around 40,000, between 35 and 40,000 people a year die on US highways. And, hundreds of thousands are injured, permanently crippled or maimed but worldwide, I know that it's surpassed a lot of diseases as being one of the leading killers of people, especially children. And it's totally insane. It's totally wrong. I mean, I think as a human right, like the WHO or the United Nations should recognize the ability to cross a street in a city or a town as being a human right. I mean, I should be able to cross the street. It's ridiculous, but they don't.
No, yeah, absolutely. I think the numbers are sometimes, I mean, it's just however many you think they are, if you don't know the facts, you'll probably underestimate them. Like we at Rahagiri Foundation, what we used to run a program called Haryana Vision Zero. Sure, you've heard what Vision Zero itself is, but it's just this, it's a project named after saying that we are going to try and achieve zero fatalities on our roads in these areas. So we were doing it all around Haryana. We ran it for a couple years, and just redesigning the street, educating more, raising awareness more, and based on our data, we were able to save countless lives. But once the COVID crisis hit, the first lockdown, which was March of last year, March of 2020, they shut down the project because they said that we have to dedicate our resources to COVID. But how can there be something more important than dedicating resources to saving lives, right? It's the same idea. You need
Yeah,
to.
here in the US, and I think also in Europe, they actually have used the COVID pandemic as a way to get more space for pedestrians and bicyclists. So in my city, the mayor designated 3 areas where a lot of people walk or bike. They closed off a street adjacent to those 3 areas because what was happening was so many people were coming out to walk or bike during the COVID pandemic because they were working at home uh, or just needed someplace to get out and recreate. That they weren't able to maintain enough distance between each other, from a public safety point of view. And so people made the argument of, oh, you got to close these streets so people have more distance to walk. And so I know that in a bunch of cities, they used this as leverage to actually get more stuff. But by saying, oh, it's a public, if you're not giving people enough space to walk, then it's a public safety, COVID's going to spread.
Yeah, I'd love to know your thoughts on the whole electric cars narrative. that this is the future? That's what's going to change.
Oh, I think I said to you, I mean, I don't believe in electric cars. I think electric cars and driverless cars are just the latest effort by the auto industry to try to remain relevant and to put off the moment of reckoning when people realize that no, cars are the problem. It doesn't matter whether they're powered with electricity or gasoline engines. And there is some marginal increase maybe in pollution and efficiency with electric cars, but it's not as great as people think. And that's even assuming that you're generating all of the electricity with green sources like wind or sun or solar power or hydropower. And in fact, in most cases, we're still generating the electricity with coal and gas and stuff like that. So it's actually less efficient than a gas engine. For various reasons. When you do, the important thing with all these things is to do what they call a life cycle analysis, where you look at a technology from its manufacturing process through its life cycle to its disposal and recycling. And when you look at an automobile, for example, a lot of the pollution that a car creates is sort of baked into its manufacture and disposal. So it varies tremendously, but there have been a number of studies that show anywhere from like 20 to 40% of the CO2 and other kinds of pollutants that a car is going to emit during its lifetime happen during its manufacture and its disposal. And with electric cars, because they require cobalt and coltan and lithium and all of these sort of rare metals, and or some of them are rare metals, and mining and various other energy inputs, they're actually more energy intensive on the manufacturing and disposal recycling side. And so the amount of, the efficiency increase over a gasoline engine, it's just not as great as people think. And if you're not simultaneously reducing the overall vehicle miles traveled in your country, then you're not really reducing carbon emissions. So, and in the United States, I don't know what's going on in India, but like in the United States, we have these guys like Elon Musk, who's sort of a proselytizer for the automobile industry and for technology. And they're pushing this stuff, but they're not suggesting that we should stop building roads. So my state, just one state, and we only have between 5 and 6 million people in my entire state. They're still adding anywhere from 50 to 100 lane miles of road per year in the state to the highway system, and they're spending all this money to do it. And this hasn't stopped at all. And so there's a project near me, like out in one of the suburbs right now, where they're widening a highway. They're adding 2 lanes to it for just like 4 miles or 5 miles. And it's costing them $287 million to do this. And it's ridiculous. And those 2 lanes will fill up like that. They'll fill up, and people will be complaining about traffic congestion all over again. And they will have blown $287 million. And so until you stop that, until you an idea that I really love and has been around for a long time is states and cities and countries and the world needs to institute what they call a paving moratorium. And that's a statement that we're not going to build any new roads. We've built enough roads. We'll maintain the roads we have, maybe, but we're not going to add any more lanes. We're not going to add any more parking lots. We're not going to add, and that's sort of the first step, because honestly, if we really want to, get to like sustainable carbon outputs, we need to like half our current vehicle miles traveled. And we're not even, it keeps growing every year, and we're not even making an effort at like reducing road building. So I just view electric cars as just kind of an effort by the auto industry to sound like it's being green, but it's not really being green.
Yeah, I think the the electric cars narrative is making us stray away too far from the actual issue and is honestly not giving enough credit or attention to the actual emission alternatives, right? If we had more clean open spaces, more people would want to do their commutes on foot or on cycle. If we improve our public transport systems, people might not want to go out and spend all that money on a car. Let's say it can reduce future car purchases. Look at cities
Yeah,
like Denmark.
if we spent all this money making cities nice places to live,
Mhm.
in the United States, we have a tremendous amount of sprawl. I mean, India, at least around its major cities, has some density of population. But in the United States, we have we waste land. I mean, we have these cities and places that are really sprawled out and people living in single family suburban tract homes. And so they drive everywhere. And yeah, if we focused, there's a famous line by I forget who it is, if it's Lewis Mumford or it's some other urban planner, but that nothing you can do with transportation is as effective at getting people where they need to go as lessening their need to travel. So, if you can lessen people's need to travel by good zoning in your city and putting like jobs and services and things near where people live, or if you can any way that you can make communities essentially more walkable or bikeable, then you don't need all this high-tech transportation. And yeah, I mean that, and the electric car debate is sort of distracting from that basic idea that needs to be focused on.
I feel like we have case studies of open spaces successfully been made for the people, right? Like Denmark and Netherlands and Europe. It's not it's not a new idea. We just have to sort of follow suit in different ways. We need to figure out how they did it, where their air is so much cleaner, their roads are so much safer, but it's just not done. And that narrative is not pushed. And I feel like it's quite depressing.
Going back to my thing about where gas taxes and toll revenues go, and I would say that's something to look at is, in wherever you are in India or anywhere is, automobiles are generating a lot of revenue because for some people, because they pay fuel taxes and they pay tolls and they pay motor vehicle licensing fees and all this kind of stuff. And where's that money going? If it's going back to more road building, then you're just going to get more highways and more car infrastructure. But if you're able to spend it, it's a huge pot of money. If you're able to spend it on public transit or on other things to subsidize alternatives to driving, and view these taxes as what they call sin taxes. So like the taxes on alcohol or cigarettes were meant to deter people from smoking or drinking, and then you were spending that money on I don't know, alcohol treatment programs or something, But if you view the gas tax and toll revenues the same way, and Europe is able to do this, and it has to do with the fact that in Europe the transit agencies and public transport, public ownership of public transport predated public ownership of highways. So after World War I, all of the streetcar systems and the rail systems and everything in Europe were bombed and destroyed because of World War I. And so the national government of France or of Germany or of Denmark had to take over the railway systems and run them. And so they had all these things had been nationalized in the 1930s. And so after World War II, when they had all this Marshall Plan money and stuff like that, they were able to put it into these agencies. They had public agencies that they could pump some of this transportation money into, and those agencies could compete with highway agencies on an even playing field. And they didn't have these dumb laws like we have in the United States that prevent toll and gas tax revenue from being used on other forms of transportation. And so that, in my opinion, that's why they're more, they're ahead of us or more progressive on that score.
Absolutely agree.
To make those changes are, it's politics, and it takes a lot of organization and political willpower to make that happen for a variety of reasons.
Yeah. I also want to mention that some of your work on these issues. So you have written 2 books, namely, I think, Cartoons and Why We Drive. Could you just tell us a little bit more about why and what do you talk about in these books?
Cartoons was there used to be a publication called the Auto Free Times in Northern California that a guy named Jan Lundberg started. And Jan Lundberg was a part of the Lundberg family, and they are famous for doing analysis of oil industry. But he was like the black sheep of the family he hated cars and hated oil industry. And so he started the Auto Free Times, and he kind of came up with this idea of a paving moratorium, and he was promoting it. This was in the 1990s. And I started drawing cartoons for that. And through that, I met another guy who worked for him for a while named Randy Gent, who in turn started Car Busters in Europe. And I forget what the group is called in Europe, or was called. It was like World Car Free Network. And I think there's a guy actually in India now, Eric Britton, who used to work for World Car Free Network, who's trying to do developments, alternative transportation development stuff. But anyway, they had a magazine, and they had various websites and information and stuff like that. And I drew a lot of cartoons for them. And at a certain point, I put all these cartoons together into a book, which Randy Gent designed. And we put lots of quotations about automobile history and, sort of crazy facts about cars, and a bunch of essays and stuff. And that was the first book, and that was released in 2001. And it was pretty popular amongst a tiny circle of people who are into these issues, like transportation planners and stuff. And then I got more involved in activism. I had been living in the San Francisco Bay Area in the early 1990s when the first critical mass rides happened. I don't know if they ever have those in India, but critical mass rides were where a whole bunch of cyclists, you would just say, put out a notice on email or on social media, and you would say, okay, if you're a cyclist, meet at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock at this spot in the city, and we're just going to go for a ride. And so basically, as many as thousands of people would meet on their bikes in this spot, and they would clog traffic, basically, and we would just ride wherever we wanted to ride. And it was sort of a moment of trying to get more visibility for bikes and bicyclists, and to sort of force cities to put in more bike accommodations. So it was sort of a direct action thing. And it still goes on, I think, in some places. I know they still have them in Brazil, like in Sao Paulo. But because I've ridden in one in Sao Paulo, but they used to be a way in the early 2000s and the 90s for, if you were in some new city, you could meet other people who were into cycling, because you could just look up and see where the critical mass was in that city. So I was involved in that, and I got involved through that in other kinds of activism. And then since I moved to St. Paul, Minnesota, I've also been involved in alternative transportation activism, and I'm now the co-chair of our local bicycle coalition, which is like we're an advocacy group in the city. We push the city to adopt an actual bicycle and pedestrian plan, with specific streets and specific routes and everything. We got that passed in 2015. And now the way, because our city doesn't have a lot of money, the way we implement this plan is whenever a street comes up for repaving, if it's designated on this bike plan as having bike lanes or having some sort of bicycle infrastructure, then they have to put that on the street when they repave it. And so we try to turn out people to public meetings to say, you need to put this on the street. And, if you can get like 20, 30, 40 or more bicyclists to show up for a public hearing, then, you get what you want, and you get people to write into their city council members and to the mayor's office and say, yeah, we want this. And so that's kind of what our group does. And as a result of that, I've spent a lot more time with engineers and people in public works departments, and both at the city level, the county level, and the state level. And so I've gotten more familiar with laws around all this stuff. And there you go. And that's my interest. And then as a result of that experience, I wrote the second book, which is Why We Drive, which partly was, I used to do, after the first book, after cartoons, people asked me to come and do slideshows of cartoons and talk about transportation issues. And so over time, I kind of developed this slideshow. And the second book is basically like a book version of the slideshow. But it's talking about transportation politics and like all the different historical and political angles to road building and automobiles, and how those in turn influence politics. So in the United States, they'll show after every presidential election, they'll show these maps of the US that show how each county voted, whether that county was a red county, which means it voted for a Republican like Trump, or it's a blue county and it voted for a Democrat like Obama or Biden or whatever. And you start to realize very quickly that the Democrats and sort of more progressive interests control cities, and control the higher the density of population, the more likely that place is to vote for Democrats. And the less density of the population, the more it tends to be conservative and vote for Republicans. And so it's a way in which automobiles and automobile-oriented planning has actually influenced the political process. Because people don't interact with each other. If you're living out in a suburb or in an exurb of the United States, you don't see other people who are different than you on public transit. You don't hear sort of alternative viewpoints necessarily on. There's fewer options for radio or for media, other kinds of media. Your sort of view of the world is from a car windshield. It's much more constrained. And so that influences how people vote. So I talk about that. I talk about these things with these laws that dictate how you can spend fuel taxes and tolls. And I talk about just the impact of the car on the landscape.
So I think you wrote cartoons in 2001, and then Why We Drive in 2013. We're in 2022 now. Would you say that there has been any major change in the systems, and is it moving in the right direction?
No, I mean, I wish I could say I wish that, there have been small changes. I think it's really, it's very much on a city by city basis. I think more than anything else, you see things like New York City. I grew up in New York City, but had not bicycled there for a long time. And recently this summer, my wife and I went there, and it's fantastic. It's actually a really nice place to ride a bike now, because they have all these protected bike lanes everywhere. And they did them on the cheap. They use parked cars to protect the bike lanes. So they just move the cars away from the curb, and created a safe space essentially between the parked cars and the curb for cyclists. And so they really, in like an 8-year period or something during the Bloomberg administration, they really transformed New York City. And I see that in other cities. Where I live, I'm in St. Paul, Minnesota, which is across the river from Minneapolis. So we're called the Twin Cities because we're right next to each other. And you would know Minneapolis because that's where George Floyd was killed by police in 2020. But Minneapolis has actually improved biking unbelievably. They're one of the top mode share cities for the United States. They're between 5 and 6% of people before COVID were getting to work by bike, which is really small compared to the Netherlands, where it's like 40%. But for the United States, it's very high. I think the highest city in terms of a percentage of commuters who get to work by bike is Portland, Oregon, and that's around 6%. But anyway, a lot of cities have gotten religion, so to speak, about making themselves more walkable, more bikeable, more pleasant places to be, at least pre-pandemic. And so I notice a change there. In terms of overall national policy, I don't notice that much of a change. And we're simultaneously, outside of cities, we're still building these suburbs and suburban communities at breakneck speed, and we're still building roadways and doing these really stupid development patterns, which are making us even more addicted to oil and cars. And but you keep trying. What can you do?
Yeah. So I guess
I'm stubborn, so I'm gonna keep like. Plus, like, it's fun to bike. I mean, I don't know about where you are, but like, I would rather get to where I need to go tonight. Where I live is very cold, so I'm not sure what it is in Celsius. I think it's like minus 16 degrees Celsius here.
Jesus. Okay.
Yeah. And so I went to go get groceries tonight, food for the house, for like the week. So I went to the grocery store, which is about 2 miles away. And so I have a cargo trike, like it's got 2 wheels in front and 1 wheel in back. So I can go on ice and snow, no problem, without falling down. And it's fun. It's like, I'd much rather go to this grocery store that way than drive there. And it keeps me in shape. Like I don't, I'm an old dude. I'm like 56 years old. Like, but I don't go to gyms or work out or anything like that. But just the mere fact of not owning a car means that I get some exercise. I don't know. I find it more enjoyable. So I keep doing this because I want people to change, but also because it's like more enjoyable to live that way than I think.
I mean, I think you highlighted so many points in the value of cycling. I mean, cycling is just completely underestimated, right? It's better for the environment. It is fun. It can keep you fit. It can get you from A to B in many cases the same amount of time as a car can. I think in India, there is basically no infrastructure for bicyclists, and it's really bad. On almost all of our roads, cyclists have to share the road with cars, and there's generally no lane set up for them, not even like a shared lane. It's just
I biked in Mumbai. I saw it. It was like you had to surf with traffic on your bike, kind of. And it was crazy. But one thing I observed in Mumbai, which I don't know how in other cities how it is, but is that there are thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of people riding bikes. It's just that they're like delivery guys, and they're not wealthy people necessarily. And the one thing that I think of when I see all that is like, if you could organize all those people, if you could get all those people to bike down to like City Hall or something, you'd have a lot of people. You would have tens of thousands of people, and like you might get elected officials to listen to you because, but that requires a certain level of political organizing, that's like cross caste or cross cultural. But there are a lot of people biking. I mean, I took pictures when I was there. This was in 2011, and like there are all kinds of bikes, and delivery bikes for water, for gas, for that have like these big bins, and it's fascinating. Or people carrying like these incredible loads on what is it, like I forget the main Indian bike companies, but Honda makes stuff.
Honda
Um,
does.
yeah, like the double butted top tube, or double
Yeah,
double top tube,
yeah.
and like anyway, I don't know. It's just that fascinated me.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair that people are discouraged because we also do know the sheer number of people that are killed and injured that are on cycles. It's, I mean, I guess I haven't been to Bombay in a while, and I live in my little circle here and I see it, but it's, there's bikes going at like 15 kilometers an hour around cars swerving around them at like 80. And you see this in a car, you don't need to look at the numbers, and you see it, and you can, and in your head it's like, yeah, I would not want to cycle on the road. I'm not going to do my commutes or get my groceries on the road. If you, like, I have enjoyed cycling in the past, and I mean, if I did want to, I would have to cycle inside my residential area. You can take
Right.
rounds around here, and it's not quite the experience. The experience is getting out and cycling larger distances, but it really isn't safe. Parents will not let their kids cycle on our roads. People won't. I
Yeah,
mean,
sure,
unless
sure.
it's a necessity, and we need
Well,
to adjust our.
this is how the United States was in like the 1970s, or um,
That's
and then
quite a sad
there
fact, but
were,
that's where we are now.
well, I mean, there was various waves of kind of activism of people
Mhm.
trying to get space. I mean, it's all about trying to get space on the street. And another thing related to your earlier comments about the pandemic is, I think cities have kind of realized that um, you you are not competing with other cities in your country for jobs. You're competing with Denmark. You're competing with Copenhagen. You're competing with Stockholm. You're competing with Paris, and vice versa. They're competing with you, and it's like, if you want the smartest people and the best workforce and what to want to live and come work in your city, you have to make that city a nicer place to live.
Mhm.
Um, and
Absolutely.
I think yeah, that's the first and biggest battle. And the thing about it is, I will say that, like, when you win one of these things, the next one becomes easier because people see that the first one happened and that, like, the sky didn't fall. I mean, people
Mhm.
will fight when you say, like, oh, I want to take a lane on this street for bikes and pedestrians. People will fight you tooth and nail. There'll be all these like business owners who will be like, oh, where are my customers going to park? You know, oh, like, there'll be gridlock, we'll all die, they'll like, but if you're able through like pure political force to get it implemented and people see that it's successful, then the next one's easier, and then they get easier and easier and easier. And we had that experience here in St. Paul. We didn't have a bike plan until 2015, and our first big battle was like a half a block from my house,
Mhm.
and they wanted to take 2.5 miles of parking away. And so all the business owners and landlords and people went berserk. But we won. We got enough people and enough political clout to make it happen. And then it was very successful. Nothing bad happens, and then the next things, every subsequent things got easier,
Yeah.
and I've seen that same thing play out in New York City and other places. So I would say that, usually you pick some spot where, you know, uh, I know that this guy Kalpesh in Bombay and Mumbai, he was saying that uh, they were trying to get this one waterfront strip turned into some sort of esplanade, or bike and pedestrian way, because people were already walking there.
Mhm.
And it wouldn't be that hard to, like, make some nice crossings of other roads on it, and like make it more, and I think he was right. I don't know that they've done it or been able to do it, but picking one thing that's like useful to people, but also, winnable,
Mhm.
and just getting enough like organizing and sort of political force behind it to make it happen.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's my plug for it's possible, man.
It's a great
You can
plug.
do it.
Yeah.
I expect to show up in India in like 5 years, and there'll be no more cars. It'll be awesome.
Wow. That's a great dream. We'd love it.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. So, given that the name of this podcast is the Pave the Way podcast, I'd like to end it by asking you, how do how would you say we change the narrative and pave the way forward from here to achieving a more robust and equitable transport system?
Organizing, I mean, anything that you want in life, um, especially anything that you want that's in the public sphere or the public sector, it's all about political organizing. It's all about starting groups and listservs and, both in real life, but also using social media and other means to try to get people who have similar desires as you do together and organizing and trying to get people who are sympathetic with you or even your own members elected to the city council or elected to zoning boards or getting a mayor that's sympathetic with your interests into um, and I think it's about lobbying the highway engineers in your city and showing up to public meetings and saying, hey, we want some bike and pedestrian accommodations on the street. And it's a battle. I mean, there's no sort of magic to it, really. It's just, it's just organizing, which is sort of drudge work, but one reason that I always go back to it and that I enjoy it is like I've met so many interesting and cool people doing it.
Mm.
So like there are a ton of people in my city that I would never have met except that we had to reach out to other people to try to get a bike lane built or to get something to happen, and sort of in that process I met like hundreds of people. I'm meeting you right now. I would not have met you if I was not interested in sort of the angle of how do you organize to, and that's one of the positives of organizing. And then the other positive of it is when you win, you're going to lose a lot. Like I lost and lost and lost for many years, but when you finally win something, it's so sweet. I can go a half a block from my house and like every time I go up there, somebody bikes by on this lane that was like this pitched political battle for like 6 months.
Mm.
And they don't know, they have no idea how many meetings went into getting that thing, or like how much energy, which is great. They just think it's always been there because it's a lot of students use it. And so it's kind of its own reward. If you do effective political organizing, and you see the results, especially with things like transportation or infrastructure, it's like you're like, I got that bike, I helped get that bike lane done. It's like it's so satisfying. I find it more satisfying than making art.
No, really.
Yeah, I mean, what do my cartoons make a difference in the world? Nah, maybe not, but like that bike lane, there's people who are able to use it, and other stuff that we've helped get built in the city of St. Paul, that I won't say that I was an instrumental person in all of them, but I played a role. That's the other thing, is like organizing is a team sport, and how organized your team is, and it like is, that's all how it works. I mean, you need people who are good at law, you need people who are good at social media, you need people who are good at like interpersonal skills, at like persuading people to show up for things. You need all these different people working together, and like I say, there's just something very satisfying about it when you're able to get things done. And then the relationships that you make with people, I think, are also really really satisfying. So that's my answer to how it's organized.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good way to put it. I think you have to keep the conversations alive. You have to keep, even something like this, we're from two completely different spheres in many regards, but this is somewhere where I agree. And there's going to be people all around the world concerned about these things, as long as we keep the conversations alive and we continue to mobilize the people that do care. And I think what you said, the fact that it's going to be bloody hard work, but it's doable. And
like I say, once you start to have, at least on a local level, when you start to win things, once you get a couple of these things implemented, the subsequent ones get easier. People get used to the idea that, yes, being able to cross a street is a human right. Yes, it is really nice to be able to bike to work instead of sitting in traffic for an hour. Yes, people, but getting those first things done is very hard.
Yeah.
But
well, yeah. I mean, I think we talked about a lot of interesting things today, and it's been really just quite amazing getting your thoughts on all these things. I think it's this podcast gives us an outlet to speak to people and have all these views in one space together. I think you said, you don't know if your art is as influential, and I guess we can't know that for sure, but I looked at some of the art. I mean, it's just very powerful. I don't think you need to be in the space to really appreciate the value of what that is. I mean, there's one where it's a skull. It's like a skeleton, a skull, and the parts of the skull are made of cars, and there are some of the parts of the skull are falling off, and those are driving cars. And I'm saying, I mean, it makes you think, it's got to make you think. And it's really it's been an honor having you on here and getting to know your thoughts. I'm sure everyone listening will enjoy.
Well, it's nice to talk to you. It makes me happy that you are working on this problem in another part of the globe, and that there's people working on this problem in other places. It, like I say again, this is a positive elements of organizing, or of is that it gives you hope or makes you happy to see other people working on the same problem.
And I hope in 5 years, when you come to India, you could give me a call and we could ride our bikes together in the carless street.
Yeah, hell yeah. Sure.
All right, wonderful. It was really great talking to you. Thanks so much for coming. Take care.
Thank you for having me.